Hello and welcome to the Audible, the quarterback analysis podcast. I'm Big Italy 42, here talking about some top plays courtesy of @ZachScottMoxie on Twitter. First off, Carson Palmer, much to the chagrin of Bengals fans everywhere, had himself a fine game against the Bengals last week with Adam Jones out. And once again this week, he looks to continue his great season. $8,100 on FanDuel, $7,100 on DraftKings. And Zach mentions here, past 3 games, averaging 351 yards a game, 11 total touchdowns, and now facing the 49ers team that's just been god-awful across the board, against the pass, against the run, really just everywhere. I mean, it's just a bad team. Biggest team total of 27.5 here. Already faced the Niners once this year, 311 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air here, and this is one of those situations where really the only things that could slow down Palmer here is being too good and the Niners not being close. But, I mean, Arizona has a running game, not a great one, and Chris Johnson and company, so you don't expect a lot of the damage going to be done on the ground. So Palmer should be around and more than enough to pay off his tag, and pretty big upside here as well against this terrible secondary. Speaking of upside, Cam Newton is next up. And as Zach mentioned here, this will be a Thanksgiving-only slate. And Cam coming off one of his best performances of his career, 5 touchdown passes. Overall numbers, he's had some issues with turnovers and things like that. But as far as the DFS perspective, you're hard-pressed to find a guy who's been better. Averaging just 228 passing yards a game, but 38 rushing yards as well. Has 20 passing scores, 6 rushing scores, 19 or more fantasy points, and 5 of 6. Has not had less than 16 fantasy points since week 1. And Zach mentioned here, he wants the highest floor, the quarterback, and I don't blame him. This isn't a terrible Dallas defense, but definitely not one that you're shying away from here. So Vegas team total 23.5. 3-game slate. You got a guy who's in the MVP consideration on the board, and that's a guy you can flock to and feel pretty good about it right away. Value cash game play. Everyone knows I love myself some Brian Hoyer. I'm definitely on board with this play here. From Zach against the Saints. $7,100 on FanDuel, $5,000 on DraftKings. Just seems like a gift here. And as Zach mentions here, Saints have been horrible in the secondary. They finally fired Rob Ryan, but that's not going to all of a sudden change the talent level of this defense, which is not very high. Saints over here allowing 293 yards per game. Most passing touchdowns on any team, nearly 3 per game. Last 4 weeks, allowing 345 yards a game through the air and 17 touchdowns. Zach kind of saying the same thing I was saying here with they just do not have the defensive personnel to be a solid unit. And Texans, Brian Hoyer, DeAndre Hopkins, coming off a game where no one was on really either one. Obviously, Hoyer didn't play, but Hopkins had a great game with TJ Yates under center, which a guy I didn't have any shares of. I wish I had. But now he gets a much more competent quarterback and Hoyer back here. So Hoyer's going to be a fairly popular play, but rightfully so in this matchup against the Saints, and I absolutely love him. I think if I'm playing on DraftKings, there's no way he's not my cash game quarterback, and I'm considering him on FanDuel there as well. Eli Manning from the New York Giants, $7,700 on FanDuel, $65 on DraftKings. As Zach mentions here, he said he'll be playing Palmer and Hoyer in his cash games, but he likes Eli as another option, and I can get on board with that as well. He had a 2-game week stretch there where he had 17 total fantasy points, but since then, 3 games, 350 yards twice, 10 total touchdowns. Obviously, one of those games, a huge game against the Saints. Now facing a Washington defense that has been very Jekyll and Hyde. Cam Newton threw for 5 touchdown passes against them last week. Now you got Eli Manning, who's in a pretty good spot here against them as well. And Giants in a battle in the NFC East, not a great division, but certainly no one running away with it. So every game crucial for these guys. That's going to be a nice play there. GPP play here, Jameis Winston coming off of his biggest performance yet as a rookie. 5 touchdown passes last week after not throwing any for 2 weeks. And 3 total over the previous 4 games there. Obviously, you're not chasing a 5-touchdown game here, but we've seen 4 rushing touchdowns from Winston here as well. Finally going to have all of his receivers healthy here, facing off against a Colts team that is near the bottom of the barrel, 29th in passing yards per game allowed. And Winston, certainly a volatile play, could throw a couple interceptions, but as Zach mentioned here, he has been playing better recently, keeping the interceptions under wraps, even in the games where he wasn't throwing for touchdown passes. So certainly making big strides here, and he's fairly priced as a nice contrarian play there. Aaron Rodgers next up. Obviously, this on the Thanksgiving slate. If you're not playing Cam Newton, Zach's looking at Aaron Rodgers, and it's hard not to. I mean, it's Aaron Rodgers. He's had very low ownership because he has had, by his standards, a down season. Still a fine season overall. But the past 3 games, at least 19 points in each game, 8 touchdown passes. Facing a Bears team that threw 3 touchdown passes against the first time. And the Bears have improved on the defensive end, but Brock Osweiler had some success against them, and Packers need to win. I mean, finally got back into a tie with Minnesota with the win over them last week. This is a big game for them, and I'm on board with Zach here. You expect a huge game from a discount double check. Hard to argue that one. Marcus Mariota next against the Raiders defense that has given up a ton of passing yards here. Marcus Mariota has been up and down. I mean, we saw his first game was incredible, went back down, had a huge game in his return from injury, faced a tough Panthers defense in one of those bad games. This week he's facing the Raiders, who are bottom 3 in passing yards per game, 4th most fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, and Mariota, due to the fact that he can make plays with his feet, and, I mean, he's a young player, very volatile, but he does have upside, as Zach mentions here, so he's a guy you can certainly give a look in your GBPs. Josh McCown. Now that Johnny Manziel has been back out partying, and I don't want to say lying about it, but not telling the truth about it. Now he's been demoted to 3rd string. Maybe once he grows up, he'll have a chance. He was finally starting to improve as a passer. You got to be smarter than that. But either way, Josh McCown had his best game of the season against these same Ravens earlier this year, and this is a team that is just bad on the defensive end. They're bad on the offensive end now, missing Joe Flacco, Justin Forsett, Steve Smith, everybody down there. And Josh McCown dealing with some injuries, but back into his starting position that he was in the beginning of the season. I do expect big things out of him here. And if you want a contrarian play off of Brian Hoyer, who's going to be popular, as Zach mentions here, he's a nice swerve off of some chalk there with Brian Hoyer. That'll wrap things up here for us this week. Find us on Twitter at DFCafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out the rest of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.